I'm going to invite my co-panelists to come to the stage, if they don't mind. We have with us three very, very distinguished people. Our first speaker, Dr. Amal Malki, is the founding dean of the College of Humanities and Social Sciences at Hamad bin Khalifa University here in Education City. She's a leading advocate for women's rights in the Arab world and an expert on media representation of Arab women, pushing for greater visibility and understanding of women's roles in society. Welcome, Amal. Joining Amal is Mr. Muhammad Nasiri, the Chief of Staff at UN Women. Muhammad has led important work on gender equality in the Arab states and Asia-Pacific regions, and his deep experience in international development strengthens his commitment to elevating women's voices in peace processes across MENA. Welcome, Muhammad. And finally, Dr. Huda Abadi, the founder of the Transformative Peace Consultancy. Huda brings over 18 years of experience in peace building, promoting women's inclusion in conflict resolution, and designing programs to counter violent extremism in the region. It's great to have you, Huda. Thank you. Today, we've reaffirmed that peace cannot exist without justice, but the question remains, who truly speaks for it? If history is any guide, true peace is seldom achieved by those removed from suffering. Instead, it falls unfairly to those who have endured the most to lead the work of restoring what war has torn apart. In this session this morning, we will highlight those women who, often unseen, drive peace efforts in the region, challenging the limits of institutions not built to recognize their contributions. Our panelists will explore the vital role of women in reshaping peace from the ground up and offer practical insights into how governments, civil society institutions, and academic institutions can partner to advance these efforts. So we're looking forward to a very dynamic conversation. And I know that the three of you participated all day yesterday in the closed round table with peace builders from the MENA region. I was fortunate to be there at the onset and to hear Her Excellency Lulwa Al-Khater get us started and inspire the conversations that took place. And I really mean it. I'm dying to find out what you came up with yesterday. So I'd love to hear from each of you, maybe 5 minutes or so, your major takeaways, sort of opening remarks. I will turn to each of you to do that. And then I have a set of questions that I'd like to ask you, and we will engage in a conversation as casually as we, and naturally and organically as we might, and then open it up for questions from the audience. So I'm going to start with you, Amal.
Sure.
Please.
Do you want me to?
Whatever you'd like. You can go to the podium or speak from here.
It's a free flow.
Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be on this panel. And it was a very humbling experience to meet yesterday the women peace builders, feel their energy and the strength. I think their accounts or the accounts of those amazing women yesterday just confirm the slogan that all feminists believe in. The personal is political. Let me begin by introducing myself a bit. So I'm an Arab and Muslim woman. I'm a mother of two girls who grow up to be women. I'm a feminist. I'm a Qatari academic. Actually, the first Qatari faculty in Education City to teach in an American university in Education City. That was back in 2005. I've spent considerable time researching and writing about women from our part of the world through looking at different forms of representation, from creative writing and comparative literature to identity politics and nation building, education, and other intersected fields. What is really important for me as a scholar is to produce indigenous scholarship, not Eurocentric, not something that we imported. It's something that we create from here. And I adopted this as an important agenda when I became a founding dean. I founded the College of Humanities and Social Sciences in Hamad bin Khalifa University, and thus launched programs in translation and the only women studies program in Qatar within a Middle Eastern studies program. As a feminist seeking different venues for activism, I've recently launched Women of the Middle East podcast because I wanted to build on the success of my book, Arab Women in Arab News, Old Stereotypes and New Media, but also to relate the diversity and richness of Arab women lived realities and diversity of their backgrounds. Now, we usually conflate, and I've just conflated between Arab and Muslim, but we need to know that not all Arabs are Muslims and not all Muslims are Arab. And that's one of the main injustices that happens to women when we represent them, women of the MENA region. There are many definitions, many images, used to refer to Arab women. And there's the usual conflation between Arab and Muslim. Arab woman as a category is very interesting, yet very hard to study, because the Arab woman inhabits different regions across not only Arab countries, but also the so-called West. Arab women adopt different ideologies, face and live within different socio-economic and political realities. Some are empowered by the very fact that they're born where they were born. And some are agents of empowerment to other women and change. And some live under poverty, dictatorship, illiteracy, and are willing to be submissive. Many Western studies have been conducted on Arab women, claiming to unveil them to the Western audience. And in many ways, they've reduced them to one homogeneous image or stereotype. In Western culture and media, there is a clear tendency to depict women as passive, Arab and Muslim women as passive, powerless, and culturally subordinate to men. Thus, the Western reader and audience had no option but to believe what they read and saw. And of course, we know that this has been politicized and used as a weapon, as a political weapon to colonize. Yes, colonize is a word that is still, active in our world. Now, looking at women in MENA now during all of this upheavals we're living through, I see that women seem to be held captive between claims of rescue and claims of protection, between patriarchal societies on one hand and the Western call for saving us on the other hand. And for many of us who reject both, we're made to fight on both fronts, fighting for our rights and other women's rights in our own societies, and fighting the colonial reductionist stereotype of Arab and Muslim women. Believe me, we see it now more than ever. Unfortunately, one of the biggest challenges women activists are facing is the systematic vilification within their own societies. It has been proved to be a serious challenge, and the peaceful parts as well in the MENA region. Women have been detained, women are silenced, women are threatened, culture and religion are used against them. The very framework of feminism is being attacked on the premise of its connotation to the Western framework, although, unfortunately, I would say many sisterhood failed us. Let's say the global sisterhood failed us. We can see it now with what's happening in Gaza. Where is feminism? How come white feminism or Western feminists are not speaking out and are not defending women in Gaza? Anyhow, and let alone, our exclusion from participating in decision making. We're usually replaced, and I go back to speaking about Arab and Muslim feminists within their societies. We're replaced in many instances with state feminists who act as tokens and spokespersons of the government. So within this narrative or climate of hostility, it becomes unclear how women can play a role in helping other women and helping themselves. Women, as we know, are the main victims of wars and conflict. then women bear the brunt of building what has been broken, while as participants in those broken communities, their gender roles have changed drastically as well. Let's jump to reflect on what I've learned personally from yesterday's workshop. There are many takeaways, really. Women act better collectively. The critical mass provide a type of protection that is much needed in an unsafe territory. Women coalitions are needed nationally, but also regionally. These coalitions need to be recognized by our Western feminist counterparts and need to be funded. I've written about this, and I reiterate here by saying whether this inclination towards behavior, collective behavior, is called feminism or not. I'm still a hardcore feminist. It makes really no difference to its effectiveness as a strategy of organization and coalition building among women, and the building of critical mass, the critical mass that we really need as women. Females must be united to create the critical mass necessary to remedy the blind spots of males and their patriarchal filters. Transnational treaties and conventions need to be upheld. I know personally of several women organizations in Palestine whose core remit is to aid women under occupation. But our international friends stopped their fundings. Women protection and safety is at the top of the requirements and the needs for ensuring that women continue and others follow. And this will happen through enacting laws, top down, definitely, that protect women in peace and conflict. It happens through education and building, raising awareness of the importance of a woman and their role, whether in peace, in conflict, or in nation building. And capacity building. And I think Dr. Layla yesterday was talking about capacity building a lot. Which I believe in as an educator, and I believe that it should happen across all levels. All of this will never happen, of course, if there isn't a political will. The need for regional unions came up, as well as culturally sensitive language embedded in our local narratives. I love that for someone who deals with language all the time and being bilingual. So we need to create our own narrative with our own vocab, maybe translate 1325, translate to other conventions, CEDAW. But when we do that, we need to also remember that we need to stay true to our own diversity and cultural specificities. So the language that would work in Qatar wouldn't work maybe in North Africa. And in terms of political participation, I'm a big believer in gender equality and in mainstreaming gender equality in all sectors. And therefore, there is a need for equal representation in politics as much as in all other sectors. So I'm a big believer in gender quotas. Quotas bring women voices into political systems where they are otherwise excluded, shortcutting a process that can naturally take generations. Quotas for women do not discriminate, but compensate for actual barriers that prevent women from their fair share of the political seats. And again, remember, men are the decision makers in our societies. Men make decisions in peace, in conflict, during war, about us, about our livelihoods, about our lives, about our bodies, about our children, about our families and our societies. And that's not right. I'll stop here, but I have much more to say later.
Amal, it's always such a pleasure to listen to you. And I enjoy the conversations that you and I have. And I'm looking forward to having this conversation in front of an audience. There's so many things that you talked about that I want to come back to later on. But I do want to pick up on a couple of things in particular. I think what you said about the portrayal of Arab and Muslim women in the world, in the West, the application of sort of Western yardsticks, which, do not reflect an understanding of dynamics within our societies. And I emphasize the societies as opposed to society, because he said a couple of other things that are really important to underscore over here. Not all Arabs are Muslim. Not all Muslims are Arab. Actually, Arabs make up 20% of the world's Muslim population. And not all Arabs are Arab, right? You know, you have Kurds, you have Amazigh, you have a lot of other minorities that get lumped together as Arab, but they're not necessarily Arab. And I loved what you said towards the end about, you know, the language that might work in Qatar does not work in North Africa, you know, and so we've got to stop looking at this entire region that we call MENA. And I have problems with MENA. I have problems with Middle East. I also have problems with SWANA, right? The new thing, because it's also such a huge region, and we tend to look at the whole thing with one prism. But I also want to pick up, and I'll come back to this later on, the concept of empowerment. I also try to shy away, even though I used it in my opening remarks, because women do not need men to empower them. And empowerment usually implies empowerment by men, right? There's agency, and women are, you know, empower themselves. I also, you know, I'm picking on language over here because semantics are very important. When we speak about equality, I shrink a little bit because I think it's equity that we're looking for. Equal rights, not equality, because I will disagree with, not disagree, but I'll challenge something that my good friend Milan said on stage when you said, not necessarily because women are better than men. I think women are better than men, okay? They are, you know? There are exceptions, right, Muhammad? Okay? Women tend to listen more, right? To be more empathetic. I think those are preconditions to achieving peace. We're talking about peace over here, right? Peace, justice means that you listen, you empathize, you understand, and you build from that. So with that, I'm going to turn to an exceptional man, right? And ask you, Muhammad, to share with us perhaps your opening thoughts and some of your takeaways from yesterday's discussion.
Assalamu alaikum and good morning. Sabah al khair. I always thought that I had like snazzy and cool eyeglasses until Dean Masri came along. And
but tell them about your glasses, because I commented on them, and every day you're wearing a different one but with the same insignia. So tell them about them, because this is an interesting story.
Well, I have many glasses because I've been traveling for a month. I don't travel every 2 weeks or 2 days with a set of glasses, but I do work always with women. So it's a young Thai women designer who works with the horn, and then I send them to Kabul for an only women silversmith workshop that they work at home to add the silver, and then they get it to me. So, but thank you for your intervention, because I think it provided us with a good segue to what I wanted to say. You've spoken, as you rightly said, Dean Masri, Dr. Malki, about the reductionist stereotyping of Arab women, the victimization, and the need that we need to think about agency of women. And all what you've mentioned in your intervention was defied and opposed with a lot of grace, a lot of suave, a lot of elegance yesterday in the room that I very humbly sat in silently for the whole day, because it was a group of women that make me always feel very small. You introduced yourself. I'm not going to introduce myself because I don't feel that I have the right to introduce myself in the space of women who have spent their lives to fight for a better tomorrow. So I'm a white-collar bureaucrat. I was thinking about why yesterday was exceptional. And I believe one of the many reasons that it was exceptional is the composition of that room. When we in the United Nations start to work on a subject, we de facto silo it. So if I want to speak about peace building, I bring the traditional peace builders to the room. If I want to work on ending violence against women, I get the practitioners who have been doing that. The same on the economic empowerment. Yesterday, the organizers, Ambassador Vivier, Qatar, Dean Masri, and all who have worked on the event, brought a composition of women from different walks of life. The traditional peace builders who happen also to wear the health practitioner hat, or the women who have been in the entrepreneurial space and the business space, women who have been working their lives to end violence against women. And that was, I believe, the reason for why this space was so multi-layered, sophisticated, and rich, because of this diversity. And this diversity is what we need to bring to the peace tables. And until now, 25 years later, after the 1325 Security Council resolution on women, peace, and security, we failed miserably to do. The diversity brings solutions. And this is what, unfortunately, the traditional peace builders, including the UN, have failed to do. We continue to pay the lip service, but we don't do it. The second reflection that I take from yesterday is many of us have been educated in Global North educational institutions. And we were always taught, when you're asked a question, you answer straight on. You choose the straightest, shortest possible way to answer the question and to be trained on what they call the elevator pitch. But in the Global South, we don't do that. We start our lives, we start our conversations with a story. And through the story, we try to put our thoughts and our opinions forward. And those stories are personal stories, very personal stories. And this is what I heard yesterday. So I came into a very dense day with very structured sessions, with very structured questions and very timed panels. And this did not happen because every single participant came with a story of loss, a story of grief, a story of letting go, a story of forgiveness, and a story of resilience. And through that, we came up with what we wanted to say at the end of the day. And I believe it's important for all of us to leave this room for storytelling, because we all carry trauma with us, especially those who are living in this region. And this trauma is generational trauma. You've talked about Palestine, Dean Masri. Palestine didn't happen, and the conflict didn't happen on the 7th of October. It's been happening for the past 70 years. And this trauma needs to be acknowledged if we need to talk about solutions. The third is an issue that you mentioned yesterday, Dean Masri, and you mentioned again today: justice. People are not looking for peace. People are looking for justice before peace, and then peace will come. And that's an important notion. And with that, I stop my rambling and I go back to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Muhammad. That was really helpful. And I'll pick up just the last thing that you said, and that's not always obvious, right? I mean, we think of peace we don't think necessarily of justice, but you could have sort of that negative piece. You could have that thing that can be cracked very, very easily. And, you know, just before October 7, who was it? Kirby, right? From the US administration, John Kirby, who said the situation in the Middle East couldn't be calmer, right? It was peaceful, but because of the you know, I mean, you know, there were lots of things that were brewing under the surface. And yes, in the context of Palestine, for the longest time, peace is also adopted, and this is an important point also to bring up over here and to put in the back of our minds. In the context of Israel-Palestine, for the longest time, peace, the word peace, had negative connotations because it implied the failed peace processes. Oslo was about peace, right? And so for 3 decades, we've lived with peace as sort of the driving force that has not delivered justice. Peace means, you know, the peace process and the two-state solution and so on. So that's another reason why I think it is important to bring that into it. Anyway, I'll come back to you, Muhammad, later on. Thank you. Huda, it's great to have you, and would love to hear your thoughts. You bring in a different perspective, and your life experience is quite different. Please.
The woman go.
Okay.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Good morning.
Salam.
Absolute pleasure to be here. It was also very inspiring to be in a room full of women peace builders from the region. I have learned a lot and was humbled to listen to the stories, to listen to stories of resilience and stories of hope amidst what the region is facing right now. I'm going to speak a little bit from a different perspective. I've been working on several peace projects throughout the MENA region, and I also my life story, born and raised in Morocco, lived in the United States, had the pleasure to work with President Carter, who wrote Peace, Not Apartheid. And so seeing also the working global North and global South, and being able to wear different hats. My reflections and my remarks this morning is on navigating gender dynamics within the MENA region, but most importantly, what has Gaza taught us about the blind spots of WPS if we're really trying to move forward. From experience, I have witnessed bottom-up approaches to conflict resolution, and how bottom-up approaches to conflict resolution is really what makes peace inclusive. It's what makes peace transformative, and it is what makes peace sustainable. And it's only achievable when women are part of the process, but genuinely part of the process, genuinely participating. Research consistently shows that women's participation is crucial in reducing conflict and building lasting peace. And study after study has shown that when women play a critical role in the negotiation process, the probability of reaching a final agreement increases significantly. The same thing happens when they are involved within the implementation of a peace agreement. Yet, women continue to be sidelined, underrepresented, and relegated to supporting roles due to entrenched patriarchal norms and socio-political constraints. Advocates for women's rights and gender equality in Muslim-majority countries face a number of barriers. These include patriarchal and tribal norms at the local level, but also instrumentalization by national and foreign agendas, and, unfortunately, international communities' essentialization of women in conflict-affected countries. And Dr., you spoke about it earlier. Over this past year, we have seen the Israeli occupation inflicting immeasurable suffering on Palestinian population, subjecting them to apartheid, violence, and death. The situation for women and girls in Gaza are particularly dire, with alarming rates of physical and psychological harm. Gaza has become a graveyard for women and children. Entire multi-generational families have been obliterated. Women have been arbitrarily detained, facing severe violations, including sexual assaults and allegations of rape. Amid forced displacement and famine, we are witnessing not just a humanitarian crisis, but a genocide unfolding before our eyes. And what is new is that it is televised minute by minute for the whole world to consume and watch, with women bearing the brunt of this devastation. These harrowing realities reveal critical gaps in WPS agenda. It has failed to address the specific needs and experiences of women from the global South, failing not only women of the global South, but really complicating the work of practitioners who are trying to work using the WPS agenda in the region. Let's not forget our sisters in Afghanistan, who are still fighting for a simple right that we take granted in this room, the access to education. Major actors within the international community often play either an enabling or sometimes a passive role in the systems that impact women in Palestine, Lebanon, Sudan, Yemen, and beyond. The failure to hold Israel accountable and the inconsistent application of international law exacerbate this crisis. And so if we're really trying to speak on women, peace, and security, we really need to address these double standards. It is imperative for the global community to recognize the urgent need for a new approach, moving beyond the status quo, prioritizing voices and experiences of women in conflict zones. And the gendered nature of conflict compels us to critically examine WPS agenda. While 1325 was a landmark resolution recognizing the unique impact of conflict, of armed conflict on women and girls, and brought gender issues to the forefront, and also provided a global framework that can be adapted to local context, in many cases it has not added significant action on the ground. An intersectional and a post-colonial analysis of WPS highlights this selective visibility of certain women while marginalizing and rendering invisible others. This disparity is evident in Palestine, where there's a deafening silence surrounding the plight of women, signaling to women from the global South that their lives are valued less. Consequently, the shortcomings of the WPS agenda not only undermine efforts to promote peace, but also really complicates the work of practitioners and actually also breaks this trust that has been built between, fragile trust between global South and global North. When WPS initiatives are applied tokenistically, they also fail to acknowledge the various intersecting forms of discrimination and oppression experienced by women in conflict, such as race, ethnicity, rural status, or social class. And you just spoke about in the UN how sometimes, even within UN rooms, it's just specific groups of women. Inclusion of women from various different backgrounds is essential. I've seen in many rooms where women that come from rural or conservative areas were not included or invited to participate. And really achieving gender equality, and if we really want meaningful change, we need to have a grounded understanding of how intersectionality and root causes of conflict and violence manifest both locally and globally, and stop just putting Band-Aids. 1325 underscores the need to enforce international humanitarian law to protect women and girls during conflict. So it is really imperative that we improve our efforts to hold all individuals accountable for perpetuating war crimes, crimes against humanity, genocide, including gender-based violence, especially rape, and other forms of sexual abuse. WPS needs to be leveraged better to ensure compliance with international humanitarian law and enhance women's protection. So, in application of WPS, what can we really improve, and what are the lessons that we have learned from other contexts? First, a lot of times, women's inclusion, formal inclusion in peace processes, several times, heavily limits women's participation to, quote unquote, women's issues only, women's rights domain, even though they represent half of the population. Other critical issues such as food security, education, economy, and peacekeeping are placed at the periphery. So merely granting access and participation to women falls short of addressing deep-seated institutional, structural, socio-cultural barriers that devalue women's voices. Second, the lack of accountability and enforcement measure leads to women being tokenized to fulfill a lot of times donor requirements. It becomes a checkbox. So instead of genuinely engaging women as partners and active contributors to peace-building efforts, they become seen as beneficiaries, and that's the language we use, and not seen as equal. So this hinders women from realizing their full potential as agents of peace. And we spoke about the word of, you spoke, Dean, about empowerment and what it means. A genuine inclusion of women is needed that amplifies diverse voices and perspective. Third, we see this extensively in the international development world. Gender programs have sometimes been utilized to serve global political interests, emphasizing exploitation of women's rights for broader political agendas, which has again broken the trust of the communities and created further harm within the community because trust has been broken. Fourth, to effectively achieve gender equality and uphold women's rights, it is imperative that we adopt an intersectional approach that recognizes the multi-layered forms of oppression, understands how conflict manifests itself within the specific local context, as well as a keen awareness of how power dynamics are reinforced by global structures. Women's rights should not be seen and viewed in isolation, but as parts of democratization and protection of all human rights. Social and economic rights are essential that facilitate women's meaningful participation in political processes, and the whole of society approach is needed, where gender equality is no longer a zero-sum game, but is seen as the health of the community. And lastly, since Muslim-majority countries are no way monolithic, for instance, I'm an Arab, I'm North African, and I'm an Amazigh, right? It is important that dialogues account for and reflect the local norms and address the local challenges. Conversations about controversial subjects are most productive when they are locally embedded, and we spoke a lot about this yesterday and the language that we used. And who do we engage with at the local community level? Highlighting religious foundations for the renegotiation of gender norms could be a good way to produce constructive pathways for a positive reinterpretation. Approaching gender equality only through a secular lens may deprive gendered frameworks from sources of religious legitimacy and values that could empower women's rights and facilitate the renegotiation of gender norms. So just to conclude, the WPS agenda must adopt a comprehensive understanding of the local and the global dynamics, addressing issues of occupation and genocide, emphasizing the importance of international humanitarian law. By doing so, the Women, Peace and Security agenda can more effectively fulfill its mandate of promoting gender equality, peace, security, and justice on a global scale. So the crucial question before us is not just why women should be included at the peace table, but rather how can we build a decolonized, rights-based feminist community grounded in the principles of justice and equality. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Huda. I'll come back to you in a couple of minutes and would love to talk more about how do you locally embed in communities those principles, and how do you navigate this global north, global south divide that you spoke about. But let me turn back to you, Amal, if I may. And there are a number of things that I could ask you, but I'm going to focus on, maybe I'll have 2 rounds of questions, so I'll focus on a couple of them. You've talked about, and I know that you've advocated for shifting deep-rooted cultural narratives. You spoke about how men in our societies make the decisions that impact, obviously, women. Talk to us a little bit about the approach that you've taken to shifting that cultural narrative, and talk about the resistance that you have faced, because I know that you faced resistance, and as you know, one would expect that to be the case. Yeah, how have you addressed it, and how have you resisted? Sort of addressed the resistance while remaining sort of authentic to local voices, right? Because one has to understand where those deeply rooted narratives come from.
Interesting. When I speak about the challenges I face, I don't perceive them as challenges anymore, because I believe that my cause is bigger than who I am. Let it be because I'm hybrid, let it be because of my education. I don't know, but I'm lucky and I'm blessed to feel that this feminist consciousness that I have is something that I was born with. This inclination to help other women is something that I wanted to do really early on. Whether, as a child, I remember the story that I was, I think, 15, still a child, went to Al-Umrah, Mecca, and that's when I was hit by the first religious fundamental attack on me. They've got the moral police, the religious police, and one of them came to me and said, "Hey, you cover your white, basically beautiful arm." And the first thing I did is scream, who are you? First of all, who are you to tell me what to cover and what not to cover? And we're in Mecca, we're in, the house of God. We are, who are you to spoil that for me? And that's when my mother said, "Oh boy, this girl is trouble." And but I think she got it.
Was that the first time that she realized you were trouble? There's no way that she had to wait until you were 15.
But that was the first act of activism, right? That's when I actually confronted the man. Now, I went into academia, and I have to acknowledge the state of privilege I am. And so my positionality needs to be forefronted here, saying I am a Qatari woman. I do have more than what other women have. Yes, I didn't come from an extremely open-minded family, but they are, compared to other families, they were open-minded. And thus, I did manage to go to London after graduating from college, which I had to graduate from Qatar. and studied and all that. So I acknowledge the state of privilege I am in, but I need to do something with that too. Now, yes, the moment you speak against the status quo, and we know that the status quo is patriarchal, we know that patriarchy is so entrenched and ingrained in the DNA of our societies, people will not be happy because you are meddling with the power dynamics. You're telling them, I'm shaking your structure. I want a bit of that power. At least I want to do good with it. But I'm happy that I was in academia. Now that I feel that I've done everything in academia, I've written books, I've given talks everywhere, the States. I was always the first Qatari to do so and so, the first Arab Muslim after 9/11 to, speak about this topic. But what's next? We see how words fail us. We see how the UN failed us. We see how all of those theories and framework failed us. And what's happening in Gaza had hit me so hard. Now, I never say that this is going to deter me from being the feminist I am. I am a hardcore feminist, and I'll continue being that and actively advocating for women's rights. But what's next? What should we do next? I think civil society is very important. We saw how when the communities and their structures collapsed, even during COVID, women organizations on the ground are the ones that collected themselves and created the support systems that women needed during COVID. And now, in parts of Palestine, unfortunately, not in Gaza, because, it's a genocide. What could you do there? Although, at the same time, I have to tell you, I did have a conversation with the Islamic University of Gaza, a couple of the deans over there, and their resilience and the way they speak about life teaches you lessons. The dean was telling me they bombed the university day one. In July, and again, I have to give him the credit, male. But, Gazans are different of a different breed, right? So he said, in July, we decided together, men and who were left of us, whether on the faculty side or on the student side, to come together because life is going and we need to be a part of that. So yes, as a feminist, life will continue and I need to be a part of the change.
Right. It's interesting because we often talk about, and we have for the longest time, talked about the resilience of Palestinians from Gaza. We talk about the resilience of the Lebanese, right? And I often think, do they want to be resilient, right? What makes one think that a 5-year-old child in Gaza does not want to have the same kind of childhood and future that a child anywhere wants. We're so proud of their resilience, but it's imposed on them, right? Who said that they want to be resilient? Maybe when I come back, or maybe just very, very quickly, just tell us about your two daughters. And because you mentioned your mother, and when she found out that you were trouble in a public setting, what do you try to impart on them? And maybe with that, I want to talk about, just very quickly, every country in this region is different, obviously. And one of the things that I admire a lot about Qatar in particular, the role of women in society, in the public sector. And, you have role models. You have role models in Her Highness Sheikha Moza, and in her daughters, Sheikha Hind and Sheikha Mayasa, and others. So, your daughters also have a role model in you. And I should qualify this by saying what I said yesterday to the group. Women should serve as role models not only for girls and for other women, but for boys and for men. That is incredibly important to underscore. Anyway, go ahead.
I've always been perceived as a role model, but I would like to think of myself as a strategic role model. So someone who had, fallen a lot and collected myself and chose to stand up and continue. And I think this is what my daughters see. So I've got a 14 years and an 11 years old, and both of them are fierce feminists. Like, they scare me. They scare me to the core. And we have very open conversations. As I told you, I am a hybrid as well, and intergenerational trauma. Oh, Muhammad, don't get me started. My mother lived 18 years in Lebanon, but she is of Palestinian origin, but she wasn't connected to that. And now with what's happening in Gaza, I wanted to connect with that background, because I know that the grief that I feel and the sadness and the displacement and the feelings of exile, although I am in my country, comes from somewhere. So I've been digging deeper into that, and the things that I'm learning are amazing. And this is, again, when we conflate between Arabs and Muslims, Palestine and the richness of Palestine. I've learned that the northern, part of Palestine where my mother's family come from, were originally the original Christians, right? Who then at some point, some of them converted into Islam. So look at that diversity. This is how I feel it in my DNA and in my blood, to say the truth. I want to be connected more to that, and I want my daughters to know that I'm raising them not for today. Definitely, today is not a very good day.
No, it's not.
Definitely not for girls, as much as it's
for anyone. For anyone,
true. But for women in specific, we're at a disadvantage on all levels, really. The moment a woman is an agent of change and tries to, impact and change, people really get unsettled, exactly, and attack you. Of course, attacks take place, but it doesn't deter us.
Good. Muhammad, what role do men have in advancing, peace efforts where women are at the center? How can men be co-architects? I mean, to what extent was that a theme yesterday? In your discussions, did you talk about sort of, the role of men in supporting, not empowering, but supporting women's leadership and supporting women's agency and voice and so on? How do you see men playing a positive role in that? Does a man, when do we get to the point where we don't have to talk about these things, right? When it's not an issue. I mean, when do we get to the point where you don't have to, as a man, identify as a feminist in order to, open the door, right? To establish your credentials. When everybody is a feminist, when feminism doesn't need to exist because we've achieved that parity. What role do men have in that?
It actually did come across, and it has been tabled yesterday a few times from different friends around the table that I can see now. And I do believe at the outset that patriarchy is the strongest political tool to continue to hoard power. So it's a political tool. And one of the main reasons why we haven't been able yet to bring women to the main negotiations table is that. So you do find combatants who realize that they have finally to compromise and give a bit of their power to the other side. So they would tell themselves, and do I need yet to get women to share this with me? So I'm already compromising and I'm already giving away power by sitting on the negotiations table with my enemy. And now I'm going to bring yet another element to concede even more. So that's I believe what goes around on the minds of many men in that. And what we need to recognize that if we want to go about equity and equality in different spaces, especially in the peace, we need to realize that it has to be about the win-win for a bigger purpose. It's beyond me as a man, it's beyond us as a gender. It's about a better tomorrow for everyone, because it has to have letting go of some power and letting go of some privilege.
It's a means to an end. It's not an end in and of itself. Yeah.
And that has to be it. And I believe it's going to be a very theoretical conversation if we continue to speak amongst ourselves. And when I say ourselves, I mean the feminists. And I am proud to call myself a feminist, because we continue to speak to the converse, to us. Hence, we need to, if we think that men have been, or patriarchy has been part of the problem or the problem, then they also need to be part of the solution. And this is where we need to bring them on board. So indeed, it has been part of the conversation yesterday, and it's promising and it's reassuring, because when I started working in that space 30 years ago, you did find many of the amazing feminists in the region who really started that drive back in the 1950s and 60s and even before, didn't want necessarily to bring men on board. And now the conversation is changing.
Do you feel a sense of, I guess one of the challenges is sometimes men are told, you don't know what it's like to be a woman. And that's true, right? So there is an accusation of appropriation, right? And you face that with younger generations. You spoke about your daughters. When my nephew was in his early college years, he would forbid me from talking about women's rights or about, issues facing Black Americans or what have you. You're appropriating. You don't know. You're not Black. You're not a woman. He's, softened since then and understands. But is that something that you come across? Or how do you negotiate it within yourself?
But I'm very conscious not to speak on behalf of, and I'm very conscious not to be in a space where I'm in a space to lead. I'm very, very proud to be in spaces that are led by feminist women that have been my mentors, my leaders in my career. And the space that I occupy is a space that would facilitate the inclusion of voices. But I am by no means someone who would be in a position to speak on behalf of, because your nephew is right. Who am I to relate or to think about what every woman goes about her life every single day?
That's great. And that's the distinction, because the patriarchy, when it does speak about women's rights, it speaks for women. It pretends that it knows what's best for women, right? And that's an important distinction.
And another thing that I also do not appreciate, and I believe that many of the men do it with goodwill, but I believe we need to also be aware of it, that they come and speak and they are supporters of women's rights, and they say, because I have a daughter, or because I am married to an amazing woman. What if a woman is not a mother, she's not a wife, and she doesn't want to be in relation to a man? So I think we also need to be conscious of that space as well.
Absolutely. Thank you. Huda, can we go back to some of the things that you talked about in terms of community-based peace building? I know that was a theme yesterday. You spoke about the global north, global south divide, very sobering, right? As we, in a number of respects. I mean, one, the global north trying to impose sort of its prism on, and its template, if you will, on the global south. Women of the global south, children of the global south, people of the global south are less deserving of life. And we see that. I mean, you look at the contrast between Russia, Ukraine, and how that is perceived in the West versus Israel, Palestine. People of the global south are looked at differently, they're treated differently. What is, in your opinion, the correct approach to try to address that and to think, maybe take that from the macro to the micro, right? How do you embed locally within communities in this region in particular the kind of peace-building efforts that challenge those paradigms?
Yeah. Thank you for your question. I think I just want to take it a little bit back, because a lot of us work in the, it's hybrid, right? It's not fitly boxed. And I think the way we do peace building or the way we work needs to change. The how needs to change, and we really need to reimagine another way of doing peace building, because definitely we have failed. I mean, look at how many peace agreements we have. Look at how many resolutions we have. Look at how many billions have been spent, but we have failed to build sustainable peace. That means that the formula that we have been using, some of those ingredients are not working. And we need to have the moral courage to be able to have some resistance. And I think first, that partnership needs to be based on respect. And there needs to be more. One of the main ingredients of peace building, I think, that is missing in a lot of spaces I've been in, is the lack of humility. It's knowing, we know what you want. So it's already packaged. And I'll give just a simple example. I've worked in a lot of PVE, preventing violent extremism projects. Billions have been spent on counter narratives and actually pushed down to a lot of the countries, saying that the PVE projects need to focus on counter narratives. Whereas the roots, which means basically, if that's the counter narratives is the issue, it means that the problem is ideology, which means if we dig a bit further, that means Islam is the problem, right? We need to be good Muslims. Let's have the good Muslims teach the community on how they can practice and become good Muslims. And that does not go with what the evidence shows.
Right.
So for instance, if we are looking at a lot of the studies, it shows that it is socioeconomic marginalization, the lack of belonging, are the primary root causes. It's not the ideology. And so here you see how we need to check our own implicit biases, even as peacemakers and as practitioners, and really question, like, what are our implicit bias when we are going into a region and working? And do we do active listening? Are we listening to what the community needs? And this is what community peace building is very good at, in comparison to more formal, like top down.
Right.
It's actual listening. It's understanding the differential vulnerabilities. It's, for instance, understanding that even within the same country, the vulnerabilities of, for instance, a region in the north might be completely different from the region in the south within that same country. So understanding the complexities, and the world should not be viewed just as black and white prism. And I think we need to listen a bit more. And we also need, when we are in those spaces, when we have privilege, like you, I know, I realize I have several privileges. I sometimes am in rooms where we're talking about a specific country.
For instance, we were in a room where we were talking about Palestine. There was no Palestinian. How can you be talking about Palestine and there's no Palestinian? But it's like our own responsibility to speak up as well. And to give the mic and to ensure that the next round, you really need to have representation, but not tokenized representation.
Not token, right.
Right, like genuine representation.
Right. And representation not to, for example, talk about, as you said earlier, women's issues.
Exactly.
Right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So I think that's really important. And also amplifying voices, amplifying voices from the Global South. And again, turning it back to community-based peace building, what it's really strong is the sense of inclusivity, working with different marginalized groups, understanding the local context. The new buzzword is localization. We hear it all over. But do we really do localization? So every few years, every 5 years, we have new buzzwords. But we don't really engage it. It's kind of like just the checking of the box.
Right.
And so we have to take a step back, reflect, ask difficult questions, and be able to kind of reimagine how we do peace building.
Love that. Do you see, and this is a question for all of you, I mean, I'll start with you and then I'll turn it to the audience. I think we have people with microphones ready to, right? We do? Are there people with microphones? Okay. So just get ready, okay? But so my question to you is, do you see a shift? I mean, I'm trying to find sort of some hope. Do you see a shift in Global South, Global North dynamics? And, you know, by the way, there are people, and amongst them colleagues of mine in Milan's, who question sort of this Global North, Global South, you know, binary, if you will. But with that caveat, if you will, do you see a shift? Do you see the Global South asserting itself more, being more confident? I guess, you know, I'm sharing my view, but what do you see?
Absolutely. I mean, who spoke about Palestine? South Africa.
Yeah.
That says a lot.
Right.
It says a lot. Yeah. So I think it has shifted, and I agree with you. I also have these issues with binaries, but we need to capture it somehow.
Right.
Because what Gaza has shown, like, I am a practitioner, I'm an academic, and I try to bridge both. I work a lot with communities. I love working with grassroots. It makes my work much more difficult because of what is happening in Palestine, even in, you know, like in Morocco. But people feel that lives from the Global South, this is why I use this term, and a lot of us, again, we don't fit in the nice boxes, we are hybrids, but it's like that some lives are valued less. And so, but there is, I mean, I have to keep hope. You have to keep hope if you're in this work. Absolutely, and I feel there is this reclaiming of your own narratives. I see this a lot in the work that I do. You spoke about media representations, reclaiming what it means to be X, Y, and Z. Young people are playing much more of an active role in leading.
That's right.
Not in following, but in leading initiatives and taking risks and speaking up and not taking the traditional responses as a yes. And also with technology. Technology has played a huge role also in terms of connecting. Absolutely.
And providing a platform for people to express themselves and to connect with one another. And alternative media outlets are springing up also and speaking the language of the Global South with the Global South, oftentimes by global Southerners in the Global North.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And just one point, because I think I see this more of like also indigenous peace building frameworks.
Right.
Becoming more elevated.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Amal, do you have any thoughts on that same question?
I would say that, especially if we narrow it down to talking about women and women narratives, definitely new voices have been emerging, using new forms of media, social media in specific, calling for fair representation, centralizing women and women's issues as well, which did not happen before. And this basically highlights the new era of media and digital activism, feminism and activism. And we saw that during the revolutions, the so-called Arab Spring, where women and women activism transcended geographical boundaries. The narrative is definitely changing, but women are still practicing their agency within the spaces that were prescribed to them, even on social media.
Yes.
And there are still red lines that they cannot cross. And we know that, and we've seen Amnesty reports talking about violence on social media, because violence exists in reality and it just translates itself on social media. I went through it. I was threatened on social media too, as well. So, and nothing happened because there are no laws that protect us, protect women, let alone, and their own realities, let alone on social media. But I also second what you said. Younger feminists, males and females, tend to be braver than us. They cross all lines. They expose the atrocities that are happening to women who dare to not only think but also change. Not just envision but all do. And as you said, those I love saying hybrids. I believe that those hybrids, I know that I would say that Edward Said single-handedly changed how the world, i.e. West and Americas, perceive Arabs and Muslims. But now, I think some of the heroines in America are Hadid sisters, right? So hybrids taking their state of privilege. I know it's interesting, but we need to give credit where to those young females and males within that context, speaking up about Palestine, like Gigi Hadid and Bella Hadid and those youngsters.
Yeah. More courage. Okay, Mohammed, before we turn to the audience, I'm interested in the question of global North, global South in the context of the UN perhaps, more broadly. I think we're going to see shifts in the role of the UN and how the UN is perceived, and perhaps even how it's structured. I mean, when you have Israel banning the Secretary General from entering the country, when you have, as we did yesterday, Israel banning UNRWA, which has been the lifeline for Palestinians, not only in Palestine, but in neighboring countries. There's gotta be a shift that's going to happen as a result of all of this. I know it's a big question, but just very quickly try to respond to that, and then I'll go to the audience.
I agree with you on the binaries, and that's why I believe when I speak about global North and global South, I speak about it within the framework of the United Nations, because we still look at it in a very rigid way, right? So when the United Nations embark on work, especially the programmatic work and the advocacy work, you do it in the global South. And that's a very traditional way of looking at things. But I fully agree with you that the shift is happening, and there is becoming more and more of a continuum of gray about positions, about informing each other from the different spaces. We're definitely at an existential crisis as the multilateral system. And if we are not to prove that we are of relevance and meaning, we're going to get out of business soon. We're going to get out of business because everyone is blaming the United Nations for what's happening in Gaza, for what's happening in South Sudan, for what's happening in Sudan, in Haiti, and in so many other places. And that is not only confined to blaming, but the international community is resorting to different spaces to look for solutions. So we're moving from multilateralism slowly to minilateralism. Small groups of countries coming together, working things with each other on regional spaces, etc. Hence, we need to find a way to claim back the space. Do I have an answer for that? I do not have an answer for that, but we definitely need to reform. Yeah. We're such a big, lethargic oil tanker that is not eco-friendly anymore, that has big, heavy, old engines, and for us to shift direction, it takes us time.
Right.
And we need to change, because the international community doesn't have the financial ability to continue to fund such a heavy and expensive machinery. We were all talking yesterday in the room about the lack of funding.
Yeah.
We're not going to be able, and the taxpayer is not going to come and say, I will continue to invest in you if I'm not going to see return on investment. So we need to look into that.
And, if we get Trump as president, it's quite unlikely that he will also withdraw funding to the UN anyway.
And it's not going to be only about the White House and DC. It's going to be a ripple effect in other spaces in the world.
So this might be a tipping point, and in 5-10 years from now, there either is no UN or there is a radically reformed UN. So we'll wait and see. Okay, I'm going to turn to the audience for questions. I'm just going to ask for two things. One is to keep your questions brief and make sure that there's a question and the question mark at the end of your statement. And secondly, I want to invite people, particularly peace builders who are with us today, if you want to ask your question in Arabic, please feel free to do so. إذا تسأل سؤال بالعربي اسألوه, and then I will sum it up for the rest of the audience and for my panelists. Okay, so let's start over there, please.
Thank you so much for this opportunity. My name is Iman Ibrahim. I'm from Sudan. Now I'm doing my master in Hamad bin Khalifa University. I'm not sure I'm lucky or not, because I relocated recently in Doha due to the ongoing armed conflict in Sudan. Sudan, where unfortunately the women body is used as a silent weapon in this war. Actually, in one state, like 300 and plus women have been raped. This is a confirmed cases. And unfortunately, 70% of those women have been raped in a group. Actually, I can imagine the psychological effect for a long term after these events. I will make it short, but I'm asking about the role of the higher education institute in empowering women to contribute in peace building. And thank you so much.
Thank you, Iman. Anyone would like to take that, the role of higher education in empowering women? I mean, maybe it's something, Amal, you can.
I want to hack it because
Iman?
Iman is a student of mine. Yesterday she presented on, gave us an overview, a historical overview of Sudan. And one of the things that I've learned, that there are 500 ethnicities in Sudan, 500 languages, believe it or not. And she gave us the evolution of women organizations and women activism in Sudan. I take my hat off to you, wallahi, Iman. You're amazing, just standing here and using your voice to remind us about what's happening. Higher education, of course, should have a role, as well as civil society, as well as politics, as well. In higher education, within our remit, we try to have programs that are relevant to both men and women. I think negotiation, peace building and negotiation and conflict resolutions should be a part of our curriculum, starting really early on. We don't need to wait for higher education. Capacity building, as we spoke about it, is very important, not just in education, but also in profession, in different professions, and awareness building. I think this is where I'm coming from, but I'll leave it to my colleagues to add to that.
And nothing more to add other than education, absolutely, and it plays a critical role in peace building and in empowering women and men.
It won't change the status quo now.
Right. It takes time. I think I see one of my students back there. Back there, in the back, behind you. Yeah.
Everyone, and thank you so much for this incredible opportunity. I am a student here at Georgetown, majoring in international politics, and I wanted to ask, perhaps are we not inviting women to the table much later than they are needed? And the reason why I ask this is, there's research on how when women lead, even the probability of conflict just decreases drastically. So my question here is, how are we integrating feminist foreign policy as a preventative measure to creating peace before conflict even begins?
It's a great question. Thank you. Bada, Hamad?
Right? Absolutely. I think where we have failed as a whole is in prevention. I think we need to spend more time in prevention, and that means inclusion of women in peace building, absolutely. Women inclusion in different areas. Like I'm big on intersectionality and ensuring women's voices are genuinely included, and there is a foreign feminist policy as well. But the one issue, though, I have is many countries right now that have been silent in what is happening have a feminist foreign policy. So the question is, how do we define a feminist foreign policy, and what do we mean by it? What do we mean when we say we have a feminist foreign policy when it comes to militarism, to peace building, etc.? I think we need to define it and make sure we are in agreement and then build from it. But prevention, absolutely key. And women's inclusion is key. And one last thing, I think it would be also very helpful, which came up from our conversations yesterday, is that if we can include community-based peace building that happens every day, because peace building is everyday peace building. War is easy, peace is difficult. And so if we can connect what communities are doing, which is social cohesion, building trust, rebuilding the social fabric, linking it to track one. And I think this is what is also missing.
Okay.
Can you explain a bit what track one is?
Official negotiations. Thank you.
Yeah.
Have no woman on it.
They come at the end.
They come later.
If they do.
If they come.
If they
Yeah. There were some hands earlier over there sorry? Okay, I'll come to you. I promise. Okay. So we'll take one from there.
Yes. No, because
صباح الخير. كريمة مقطف من الجزائر، مشاركة في نقاشات الحلقات النقاشية حول المرأة والسلام. أولا نحن قوم نشكر، شكرا لفتح هذا الفضاء للحديث عن أدوار النساء وأدوار المرأة في بناء السلام. سؤالي لكم ألا تظنون أن المفاهيم قد لا تغير شيء حتى ولو لم تخدم هويتنا العربية؟ الأهم أنه هو كيف نستفيد من هذه المفاهيم وإعادة بلورتها. حسب مقاربتنا نعلم أن المقاربات مختلفة حتى ولو لدينا تاريخ موحد، مختلفة حسب الإطار والسياق العام المحلي. قلت البارحة وأعيد كذلك، القرارات وكل القوانين الدولية، هل هناك طريقة إعادة quand on parle de la conceptualisation des résolutions، أي إطار المفاهيمي لكل هذه القرارات لم تعد تخدم السلام الآن في العالم، هل إعادة بلورة طريقة تفعيلها خاصة القرار 1325؟ نحن أمام إبادات جماعية في فلسطين، ما يحدث الآن في السودان، هل نستطيع كمجتمع عربي ودولي إيقاف هذا العنف؟ لم نستطع منذ شهور. هل دورنا الآن هو أن أصواتنا تستطيع أن تخرق هذا الصمت الدولي؟ هل يمكن إعادة نظر تغيير ليس المفهوم بحد ذاته لكن النظرات لغوغار الخاصة بعملية السلام أو السلام في حد ذاته؟ شكرا.
شكرا. ونوجه السؤال لأي شخص معين. Okay.
I didn't
Did you get the whole thing? Maybe you can translate it.
Putting me on the spot. Huh? Well, the first part, at least, I know she spoke about localizing concepts and whether this is going to help women peace builders. I would personally say, as an academic, and you might disagree with me, and I always tell my students that, usually women who are in the heart of, their core are feminists, but do not identify as feminists. They would tell me, why do you say feminism? I say social justice. Yeah. This way you are engulfing your cause in a way that is acceptable to the society. I'm an academic, after all, to say the truth, and what I would want to do is take the term, turn it on its head and make it mine. But for this reason, I do agree that we need a middle ground where we create our own rhetoric, not the UN language, definitely, or the UN rhetoric, but also we cannot use the local rhetoric that could maybe heavily embedded with religious reasoning, that would detach us from the current realities. So my point would be a middle ground that would elevate this, reduce this in terms of concepts and take away its Western connotations to make it ours. But I would say a middle ground.
Great, thank you. Huda, you wanted to add?
Yeah, very quickly. I disagree a little bit. It depends on the context and the community you work with. I work with a lot of conservative communities. If I go and I say I'm a feminist, they already barra. So I'm trying to create community buy-in. I'm trying to engage with men, not just women, with men and women. In all the work we do on gender, we bring men in and try to bring men and boys in transformative ways along with women and girls that are also sometimes resistant to change. I think the problem is because of the history that the region has faced, because of the history, the tension, and the lack of trust.
Okay.
They say, are you wanting to change our way of life? Is it something, again, that is imposed on us from the West? There's this sense of like their dignity has been lost, and now you're coming here and you're telling us. But there's so much power, and I promise you, I've worked with faith-based leaders that are super conservative and have been like allies to women's issues. When there's power to know that this comes within, like it's nothing imposed. So we worked with a Nigerian imam who worked on Universal Declaration of Human Rights.
Right.
And looking at it from Islamic principles and how it supports it. So it's nothing that is, there's no Islam versus the West, but it's actually, these principles are not owned by any specific group. Right. They are,
I've written about the Tunisian experience, right? And in 1956, when Tunisia became independent from French colonization, Habib Bourguiba, in implementing the Code Statut Personnel, the family code, which gave more rights to women in Tunisia than they enjoy in any other Arab country today in 2024, abolishing, for example, polygamy.
Absolutely.
He worked with Islamic scholars from within Al Zaytuna Mosque, and he argued from within Islam. I mean, the guy was really very, very well educated in Islam, and he borrowed actually from back in 1846 when Tunisia abolished slavery, and the argument was also from within Islam. So, finding that allyship, I think, is really, really important in order to get across. Okay, turning to this side. Okay, there are a couple of women. We'll start here with the lady who objected, and then we go back.
No objection. صباح الخير، معكم عايشة المريخي. أنا جاية هني بس كزائر. Please translate for the others. My English is perfect, but I prefer to speak Arabic. It's nothing to do with dignity or identity or all this stuff. It's just the way I feel more comfortable. So excuse me for that. I don't need to say excuse me, but I will say it anyway. My question is النسوية هي بدأت في السبعينات أعتقد أو الستينات أو ما قبل ذلك، ويمكن كانت النية جيدة أن أشخاص يتكلمون عن أشخاص. مفهوم النسوية تعطي انطباع أن هناك شيء ضعيف وشيء أقوى منه. بمعنى أنا لما أقول حقوق إنسان شامل الإنسان بكل أنواعه، رجل مرأة ليس رجل ليس مرأة whatever. لكن لما أنا أقول حقوق مرأة معناته أن هناك كائن مستضعف يحتاج إلى من ينصفه. مفهوم أن هناك شخص مستضعف هو مفهوم ضعيف بحد ذاته. يعني أنا ليش أقول نسوية وكأن الطرف الآخر مش موجود، اللي هو الرجل اللي بياخذ حقوق المرأة. It's not like that. يعني هو مش موضوع من يأخذ حق من، هو موضوع من المتضرر وعليه أن يتكلم عن نفسه، لا أن يجد وسيط يتكلم عنه. يعني القاعة هني كلنا أعتقد كلنا جايين من خلفيات اقتصادية متوسطة إلى مرتفعة. إحنا ما ندري هناك الجانب الآخر من العالم شنو يعانون منه. أنا ما شفت حد هني مثال، أنا ما أعرف شنو صار أمس، أنا ما كنت موجودة، بس أنا ما أتكلم أن الشخص المستضعف أو الذي يحتاج إلى حل يأتي ويتكلم عن نفسه، لا يحتاج إلى وسيط، لا يحتاج إلى مؤتمرات واجتماعات وندوات للحديث عنه، هو يحتاج أن يتحدث إلى نفسه. يعني تعطونا ميكروفون نفس هذا ويتكلم عن نفسه.
هذا السؤال.
بس مفهوم النسوية يا ريت نشيله. يعني ما في شيء اسمه نسوية، في إنسان متضرر ويحتاج إلى من ينصفه. بالنسبة للسودان على سبيل المثال دائما يتكلمون على المغتصبات. طيب أوكي، في مغتصبات توتالي أجري، بس أيضا في على الجانب الآخر أخوها أبوها عمها أيضا متضرر نفسيا يمكن أكثر منها. فبالتالي هناك حقوق إنسان، لا يوجد حقوق مرأة وحقوق رجل وحقوق طفل وهالكلام. شكرا جزيلا واسمحوا لي على المداخلة.
Thank you. It's a multi-layered statement slash question with a lot of passion. Even if you don't understand Arabic, you felt the passion, right? And I think if I understood correctly, you're raising questions about, number one, women's rights are human rights, right? I mean, so children's rights are human rights, and that's absolutely true. So why do we single it out, right? Why don't we deal with things from a broader human rights perspective, if I understood correctly? Secondly, and that raises into question feminism. Why do you need feminism? And, the implication always is obviously when you're fighting for rights, it's because you are weak, you are weakened. And what you're suggesting is that perhaps feminism deprives agency from women
that way, but what is the impact?
Oh, what's the impact? Okay. So, you want to add to that? Okay, afterwards. Okay, I promise you I'll come back to you. Okay. Who would like to take that? I'm tempted to go to you, Muhammad.
No, it's actually a question that has been asked by many, not only where we call the global south, but also the global north.
Right.
And many of the younger generations, especially young women in different spaces, feel that they do not affiliate with the concept of feminism because the concept has been stereotyped and has been reduced to that a feminist should be, one, a woman, two, who looks in a certain way, three, behaves in a certain way, four, hates men, five, is a bit combative towards life. So this is how feminism, and actually the problem there is because of the media. This has how feminism been portrayed in films and what have you. But feminism is much more beyond that. It's about a way of life, and it's about how to go about creating a better tomorrow for everyone.
And it's evolved also. I mean, the feminism of Gloria Steinem of the 1960s.
It has evolved.
Yeah.
But what we need to do, our homework, is to go back to the world and try to show how has feminism evolved in a way that is relevant to everyone.
Right.
Because it's a way of life.
Right.
And it's not only about asking for the rights of women. It's about the asking of the rights for a better tomorrow for everyone.
Right.
In a simple way.
Right.
So yes.
Right. Yeah, no, absolutely. And there is such thing as Muslim feminists who actually predated the feminists of the West of the 1960s and 1970s.
Sayyida Khadija bint Khuwaylid.
Well, you're going way back. Yeah,
she
but
was the one to propose to the Prophet.
Sure.
She was the businesswoman.
Sure.
He was working for her.
Yeah.
She was paying him salary.
Right.
She had the isma in her hands.
Yeah.
So she can divorce him at any time. So
and in 1920s Egypt,
Qasim Amin.
No, I'm talking about women.
Huda Sha'rawi,
that's the I was going to.
Safiya Zaghloul, etc.
Yeah. And
actually, Meydan al-Tahrir in Egypt, which is the liberation square, which is the biggest square in Egypt where everything happens.
Tahrir Square, right? Yeah.
And doesn't happen. It wasn't about the liberation from colonial powers. It was about the liberation of women. This is where Safiya Zaghloul stood in a balcony and she threw her veil to the floor.
Yeah.
And this was the liberation of women.
And there was another woman who did that also at around the same time.
Huda
Sha'rawi took down the veil, and then
Safiya. Symbolic, not against religion, because but it was symbolic.
Yeah. Ma'am, okay, here, and then I'll take the last question over here because we have to end.
You answered this better.
لا معليش بعدين in conversation over lunch, okay? So that means it comes back to you, okay? So, yeah.
But that's important.
Okay, I'm going to ask you then here's what I'm going to do. Okay, the four hands that have been insisting, I'll go to you, but please work with me. Make it very brief, and I'm going to take the four of you together, okay?
السلام عليكم جميعا. أضم صوتي لصوتها، سأتكلم باللغة العربية ولن أتحدث عن قوة المرأة لأننا جميعا نعلم ما هي قوتها، فنحن النساء من يلدنا الرجال، فهذه نقطة قوة للمرأة على أي حال. لكن ما أطلب سؤالي ما تغيب العدالة في تطبيق القانون عن المرأة العربية. لماذا تغيب حقوق الإنسان أو حقوق المرأة أو يعني لا يوجد حتى حقوق الطفل في المنطقة العربية كما هو مطبق في الغرب.
Legal frameworks.
هذا السؤال يراودني كثيرا وأتمنى أن أجد له إجابة حقيقية. حتى الحقوق منظمات جميعا يتغيبن في المنطقة العربية عن الغرب.
That's very, very clear. Thank you. So basically the codification into law of women's rights. Very quickly.
Dean, can I say something before you start?
أجاوب
قبل ما
بالعربي
تبتدي.
السيدة أو
قبل ما تبتدي. See how women claim the floor? See how women claim the space? And you insisted.
Yes.
بس حبيت إنه هذا السؤال كثير تنكرر يعني خاصة بالأجيال الجديدة والشابات وشباب. الموضوع الحقوق الإنسان هو بس تصنيف، يعني من نقول إنه الأشخاص ذوي الاحتياجات خاصة مش معناتهم إنه جزء يعني بشر ثاني، هم تصنيف للحقوق.
Okay.
أن المرأة بالعالم تعتبر
classification of rights.
يعني مهمش، ولهذا يعتبر إنه حقوق الإنسان وأكو قوانين وأكو هذا. البوست فيمينيزم حتى اللي يدافع حتى على الحيوانات على البيئة وعلى الإنسان تعتبر إنه فيمينيزم، يعني اختلفت التعريف الفيمينيزم.
So feminism has been broadened to include
فموضوع النسوية ما بقي بنفس الستايل ونفس الموديل اللي اللي بالسابق يعني بيحكوا عليها يعني ما يكون دفاع متطرف.
So feminism
فحبيت بس انه انوه لهذا. موضوع الحقوق المرأة انه يعني هو تصنيف فقط.
It's just
احنا مهمشين وعندنا معاناة خاصة. شكرا.
Thank you خانم. Thank you. معلش اسمحي لي the lady and then the gentleman.
Thank you very much.
And then I'll come back to you. وحياة الله خانم. I'm not going to make you upset because I also don't want to end with a man. Okay? Yeah.
Thank you. That was so insightful. And I think my question is simpler maybe, but not as easy, is that you talk so much about inclusivity, and I'm wondering how we do engage men at the grassroots levels. I look around and I counted 12 in the audience, except for the front row. And we talk about allyship being with, not for, and we talk about it, being a verb, not a noun. And how do we engage at that level, at that grassroots level, so that those conversations are happening there, not just all of us women having these conversations?
Okay, that's a great question. It's a great question. Fadal.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you for the esteemed panelists, Ambassador Verveer. It was quite informative, today's session. My specific question is addressed to Dr. Amal, maybe. In her first remarks, she pointed out, contended, that feminism in the MENA region and generally is required to be buttressed, supported, strengthened by the West and funded by the West. So my question is, what kind of support that the feminism in the MENA region requires from the West? Is it moral, economic, political, philosophical, or what other kinds does it require?
Okay, thank you. So 3 questions. The legal frameworks, the question of inclusion, particularly of men and participation in the conversation, and the last question I couldn't quite follow.
Inclusion and men and
how to include men on the grassroots
Yes, that
level.
was the question that you asked, right? But the last question
was for Dr. Amal about
we had 2
funding of feminism.
Yeah. Okay. So who wants to take what? Each of you can take one. How about that? Right?
I'll take the inclusion because I work a lot with grassroots, and I think in all of the work that I've done, we engage boys and men. It's absolutely important because if boys and men are not included, we're just talking about ourselves. We're agreeing. Yes, it's great. Yes, women's issues. Look at how. So I think we have to engage with them. But it's not just a question of we need to engage with them, but it's how do we engage with them? And that becomes very important. It's like really trying to strategically think what would be the best way to get community buy-in, and to also understand that there is going to be some form of resistance, which is natural. Just a very short story. I was doing gender mainstreaming for community leaders in a marginalized neighborhood in Morocco. And I just, for fun, I wrote the word feminism on, like on the board. And I'm like, what do you think of this word? And they're like, it's women, women who hate men. They have short hair and they smoke a cigarette. This is like Moroccan, right? They have a cigarette and blah, blah, blah. So we know like there's a language evokes visceral emotions. So making sure that our language is also adapted to the local context where there's a win-win. And to be able to do that and bring men in the room, they need to feel they have a part. Sometimes you need to tell them, yes, absolutely, you have also a part to play, and understanding their differential vulnerabilities, because they also have grievances. And we need to address their grievances so they don't feel like they're losing something by giving something, but we're looking at it from a community approach so that there's social cohesion. So when we approach it from a community social cohesion approach, there's much more likelihood to get buy-in, especially when it is adapted and spoken within the local context. I hope
that's great. Thank you. Thank you.
Maybe the legal framework.
Legal ones? Yeah, this was the case.
The issue is, you're okay with English, of course. Can I answer in English?
Free translation. There's simultaneous translation going on. Yeah.
The legal frameworks are there, actually. And there are many supportive laws in the region. And you have a portal that has a database of all the laws that have been put forward in the region on women's rights and the gender equality agenda. And we are actually doing much better than some of the global north countries in some laws, including the equal pay. We have equal pay where Switzerland doesn't have equal pay, Finland doesn't have equal pay. Where we still have some work to do is قوانين الأحوال الشخصية, the personal
family status
code. And there's a lot of work that is being done for the time being by both legislators and Muslim scholars like Dr. Abla al-Kahlawi, who have advanced the discourse on divorce, etc., etc. What we have a challenge in is the law enforcement, is the implementation of the law. And one of the biggest obstacles is the sensitization of the law enforcement and of the justice system. And it's not only in our region. The first question that is asked of a woman who has been violated worldwide on domestic violence is, what have you done to deserve that by your partner? And that's the first question that is asked in the global north and in the global south. So there is a sensitization where you look at the survivor or the victim as the perpetrator. And this is where we work also with different spaces to sensitize the law enforcement and the justice system towards that.
Yeah, thank you. Amal?
Yes, so to answer your question and to tap into what, now I'm an academic, okay, so feminism doesn't exist in my vocab, it's feminisms. So there are different, school of thoughts and feminisms, and there is the feminisms that were generated from the Middle East by women who fought for liberation, national struggles, and all that. So there are the women in Jazair, for example, in Algeria, Palestine until this day. So there are feminisms, okay? And they had different ideologies. And there is such a thing as Islamic feminism.
For example, Al-Mujadala as a center here is centered on Islamic teaching, okay, for Muslim women. And that's very empowering, because this is what we want. We want to empower women to have control and say, even within the spaces that were mainly male-dominated, women don't go to masajid or to mosques and engage within an Islamic frame for work. So that's empowering. Now, I didn't say that feminism or feminist movements need funding. No. This is very dangerous aslan to say to begin with, and I'm totally against it. What I was talking about, that women coalitions and women civil society, women organizations, by the way, they could be feminists, they could be not, they could be, feminists is not a key in what they do as much as helping women, providing help and aid for women. And I gave you the example of Palestinian women organizations in the West Bank and Al-Quds, for example, whose funding, they were funded by multiple funders, okay? Some of which, I'll say it out loud, from Germany, for example, who stopped the funding. Now that interrupted their cause and the way they helped women and the way they formed themselves. So I was talking about how women gathering and collecting locally, regionally, and internationally, because those women need to connect internationally with funders, with other women organizations, with the UN, who also provide them with funding, but also provide them with capacity building. And that's also important, but definitely not. And now this is the biggest thing within our societies in Egypt, for example. The easiest thing for the government to do is to claim that this Egyptian feminist is working with foreign entities, right? And is being funded by foreign entities, and then she's jailed and imprisoned. So I'm not talking about that for sure.
I don't know, I probably speak for everybody, but I speak for myself and say I've learned so much and I've been inspired by this conversation. Really feel very, very grateful to have shared the stage with the three of you and the perspectives that you have brought. Your work is so incredibly important, and I salute you for it. I want to thank the audience. You've been an incredible audience and incredibly involved and engaged. And the peace builders, you're doing such incredible work, and we thank you for that. And the ambassadors, the friends of Milan and of Georgetown, and who are part of this, to welcome you here in Doha, to welcome you at Georgetown University in Qatar, is a great honor. And I want to thank also Trudy and Farah from our staff over here, and Jihan from the Institute staff, because you guys make me in Milan look good. But it's you do all the great work. And thanks to Milan, first and foremost, Ambassador Verveer. Thank you.